Shooting photos on film at nighttime can be one of the most intimidating aspects of getting into analog photography because unlike when you're shooting with a digital camera, you can't just look at the back of that screen to check your exposure. It can be a little bit of a scary process, especially if you're just getting into photography in general. I've been shooting my night photography on film for the past 6 or so years, and I made a video about it way back in the day, but today I want to make a little bit of an updated guide on how you can confidently shoot film photos at night, and I want to share the process and some of the tips that I've learned along the way over the past 6 years of shooting film at night. I personally have really learned to fall in love with the process of taking photos at night. First of all, it's just a beautiful time to be out when the roads are quiet, and it's kind of this more meticulous, slow, calculated type of photo. You're always on a tripod, and it takes a little bit more time. The process is a little bit more involved, but when you get a good photo, it's also just that much more rewarding. I've shot night photos pretty much all over the US. I used to take a lot when I would photograph the coastal towns in New Jersey. I've shot night photos on all of my road trips. And more recently, a lot of my night photography is along the coast of California, photos of water at night, something that I've really been fascinated with recently. It's a really fun process. And in this video, I want to share everything from the gear that you need to metering for a night photo. And of course, we're actually gonna go out and demonstrate everything so that it's a little bit easier to understand. And I think by the end of this video, you'll be confident in your exposures and taking photos at night. Let's start off with the gear that you need. I'm using a 6x7 medium format camera, but you can easily do this with 35mm film, large format, and the process is really not that different between the formats. The next pieces of gear are more essential though. First of all, I would absolutely recommend a tripod if you want to shoot long exposures. My exposure times get anywhere up to like 10 minutes, so you absolutely need a tripod if you want to keep your photo steady. The tripod I use is made by Peak Design, and they're not sponsoring this video. I bought this tripod with my own money, but it's an amazing compact tripod. I like it because I can sling it around the strap of my long weekend crossbody bag, and it's super compact for how capable of a tripod it is. Having a good tripod that you like is actually super important because it's quite an extensive process to set up a tripod shot versus just daytime walking up and snapping a photo. The next thing you'll need is a light meter, and to make this video a little bit more accessible to anyone who wants to try this for the first time and doesn't necessarily want to go out and buy a $200 light meter, I'll just be using an app on my phone called Light Meter. It's very simple. It works decently well. You can absolutely get started with an app like this, and down the road, if you get more into it, I would recommend a handheld meter. The final piece of gear that you'll need is a cable release. This is basically a little cable that screws into the side of most analog cameras. What it allows you to do is take the photo without actually touching the camera so that you don't introduce any more camera shake into the image. And this is really crucial for a steady shot. Now let's talk about film. Realistically, you can do this with whatever film you want. If you like shooting black and white, shoot it black and white. If you like shooting color negative, shoot it color negative. My choice tends to be Portra 400 because it has amazing dynamic range and it's super flexible to different kinds of light. If you're just starting out with taking night photos, I'd recommend any color or black and white film aside from E6 positive slide films because they tend to have a very specific exposure that they like to be exposed at, and if you're just starting out, it can be a little bit difficult to get there at night, but if you're up for a challenge, by all means, use slide film. I promise we'll go out and demonstrate all of this with some actual photo taking later in this video, but before that, I just want to cover all the basics. So up next, let's talk about camera settings. First off is the ISO of the film, which doesn't really change, and you can really use any ISO film. I tend to use Portra 400 because it's just what I use for all of my work. Now, because you're taking night photos, it can be really tempting to just want to open your aperture up all the way to the brightest aperture so that your camera collects the most light. And you absolutely can do this, but for my images personally, I like to shoot around f8 or f11 because I like a deeper depth of field in my images in which everything is in focus. This is purely because I tend to shoot landscape photos at night, but by all means, shoot at f4 if you want a shallower depth of field. The shutter speed is where things can get a little bit trickier, but I promise by the end of this video, I'll try and make it as simple as possible when you're actually out shooting. This is the part of the exposure triangle that changes the most between different scenes. And just for reference, I tend to shoot my night photos anywhere between 4 seconds and 10 minutes. Usually I'm somewhere within that range, and I'll show you how to find that number later with the app on your phone. Now, one thing that gets thrown around a lot and seems like this really complex concept to wrap your head around is reciprocity. And the reciprocity of the film is basically the rate at which it loses sensitivity to light the longer you expose it. And this is a formula that you can find online. The easiest way that I've found to reference this is just this conversion chart online. So basically for every shutter speed that you measure, there's a compensated version of that shutter speed which accounts for the reciprocity of the film. It accounts for the film losing sensitivity to light the longer it's exposed. And if you like, it's very easy to just reference this chart as numbers. For example, if you calculate an exposure time of 20 seconds, the actual needed exposure time is 55 seconds. If you're shooting color negative film, I've also found that it is just so flexible that I always end up leaning more on the side of an overexposed image than an underexposed one. Now, to be honest, I don't personally follow this chart super meticulously because color negative film itself just has so much latitude and dynamic range that I tend to just overexpose the photos a little bit every time. And I found that it's like a really good safety net to just add an extra 50% of exposure time to your image. And that's usually helped me with just getting more properly exposed night images and creating a little bit of safety there so that you're definitely not risking underexposure. So with all that being said, let's go out and actually take some photos so I can walk you through this process a little bit more clearly, and I think you'll see that it's actually quite simple once you get out there. It is almost nighttime here in New Jersey. I'm at a beach town that I used to photograph a ton, and behind me, or in front of me, is actually a shot that I've taken before of an Italian ice place that's pretty popular here. So I'm gonna set up my tripod and take this shot again, and I'll show you how it's done. It's very simple. So I'm gonna start by screwing this cable release into the camera. I'll set my camera to like probably f8 for this scene. And then it's basically time to meter after you found your composition.
No, is that like a camera?
So I got my meter set to f8 here. I'm gonna just point it at the scene. And for this, I might tilt it down a little bit because I want it to be more shadow bias for this exposure. So it's saying 4 seconds now at f8. Referencing the chart, 4 seconds should be 6 seconds if you want a proper exposure. And just for fun, I might just make it 8. Get a little bit of overexposure in there. Pretty simple. I just like how dense the sign is with writing, and There's some nice other details in the scene. The sky in the background is really nice. So maybe I'll shoot it at like 6 or 7. Just the sign right there. Nice sign.
You too, yeah.
5, 6. Oh my god, that was chaos. This is definitely a darker scene here. The meter's saying about 30 seconds, so I might shoot this for a minute at that rate. The tough part about this a lot of the times is you'll get cars coming through, like this one coming now, and they're coming way too fast for me to get a whole minute of exposure. So I'm gonna just try to cover my lens as they pass by. Although it's really hard to do without introducing any camera shake, but we'll see. That's gonna wrap it up for this video on night photography. I wanna thank you guys so much for watching. I hope it was helpful. And finally, I wanna say thank you to the sponsor of this video, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an incredible all-in-one website building platform that you can use to build your photography portfolio online. I've been using Squarespace for so many years now, and they've made it so easy to get a website up and running with my photography. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, you can hit the link in my description for a 14-day free trial of Squarespace. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Willem for 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. See you guys next week with another video. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.